Well, it is my pleasure then to introduce to you Dr. Kim Schonert-Reichl, who is the Director of Health, as many of you will know. She is also an applied developmental psychologist and a professor in education here at UBC, and she began her career as a teacher in middle school and high school. Kim is also internationally recognized as an expert in the field of social and emotional learning research with children and adolescents. So,
thank you, Merritt. It's such a pleasure to be here today and to be able to join all of you. First, thank you to the team for helping organize this webinar. I just don't know you totally realize how much work goes behind the scenes in making the MDI run. So just a big shout out to Merritt and Anne-Marie for all their hard work. So what I'm going to do is in the next little while, we thought that, just to shake it up a bit to, instead of just going through all the mechanics of MDI implementation, I want to provide some background and inspiration for using your MDI data. But before I begin with that, I'm going to just give just a brief overview of the MDI. There's lots of more information available on the website and Discover MDI, but we're going to go for this way, and I do have to make sure I have it all good. And so HELP, the Human Early Learning Partnership, has a vision of all children thriving in healthy societies. And as many of you know, that the MDI is not the only population-level tool of child well-being that's used at HELP, but it's also the early development instrument, and now the Childhood Experiences Questionnaire. In development is the TDI, or Toddler Development Instrument, and then as some of you might be wanting to hear, that we're now really talking seriously about developing the YDI, or the Youth Development Instrument. Very excited about that, which would be for age grade 10. Okay, so the MDI, the Middle Years Development Index. Why is it important? For several reasons. We know that 4th and 7th grade are really transitional periods in child development. It's a time when many changes occur, both cognitively, emotionally, socially, school-wise, and in fact, some people say it's those age groups in which more changes occur in development in such a short time span than any other time in the lifespan. So it really is critical to learn from children about what are the things of how they feel about their lives inside and outside of school, and also the aspects that help develop that. The MDI has 5 dimensions that include assessment of the social and emotional development of children, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that, or SEL, physical health and well-being, connectedness to adults at home, at school, and the community, as well as peer relationships, school experiences, including school climate information, as well as victimization, and then use of after-school time, what children both do during the after-school time, both in terms of structured activities and unstructured activities, as well as their wishes for after-school time and the barriers for what they wish to be, why they're not doing what they wish to be doing. So all of these actually have been assembled. The MDI, I'm not going to go into a huge background, but just to let you know that in developing the MDI about 10 years ago, we really scanned the most recent cutting-edge science to find out what are those differences that make a difference, really identifying things that help promote resiliency, and that's why we have all of these dimensions on the MDI. The MDI is also a self-report survey, so children complete it, as opposed to the EDI, which teachers complete. And this is really a survey that children 4th and 7th grade complete online during class, during the school day and in class. The MDI was, although I mentioned we called the research to find out what's the cutting edge research to find out about middle childhood, but then the MDI developed through a collaborative process where we involve scientific experts as well as educators, children, community members, and also parents and actually school union, teacher union, and we all got together. I mean, it was quite a fun process, I have to say, where we got together over a couple of years to really identify those factors that we think would be important for us to know about children's lives in order to make a difference in their lives. That really was at the core how, if we go back to the vision, all children thriving in healthy societies. This is really what we want to know. What do we need to know to be able to make that happen? It's not an individual clinical diagnostic tool. It's a population level tool that really gives us a snapshot of children at the school level, at the district level, at the community level. And what's so critical about that is when we identify those factors that we can actually do universal programming. And what we know is that in a universal approach where you just don't pull children out and who have the problems, that you actually promote the well-being of an entire group, not just a few. So again, a really critical aspect of that. It focuses on development of the whole child, their social, emotional, cognitive development, physical development, as well as their relationships in multiple contexts. As identified in this slide, where what's so interesting about the MDI is really it's one of the few tools of which I'm aware that looks at children so comprehensively, both inside and outside of school, in contexts such as schools and families, neighborhoods, and after school time. So it really gives you a complete picture, a snapshot of children's lives. And last but certainly not least, the MDI is really geared to hearing children, listening to their voices about what they have to say. And I have more to say about this in a few minutes. It is to me one of the most critical aspects of the MDI is the idea that we gather the information from the children. And just as a side note, as some of you might have asked or been asked questions about asking children in 4th grade and 7th grade, you know, do you have measurements? You know, can you rely on what they say? Do they tell us the truth? And I have to say, after over a decade of research, as well as multiple publications really examining what we call the psychometric properties, really showing that the MDI is a valid and reliable instrument. It's a tool that in which we can do lots of work. And certainly Merritt and Emery and the resources afterward could send some of those articles as well, or list them in the place you can get to. The MDI has grown, as you see, from 2009 to 2010 with just one school district. Actually, it was Vancouver, and has grown to now we have data on over 86,000 children in British Columbia, and this year 31,000. So we're
31 districts.
31 districts. How many kids?
Good question.
Yeah, we'll
over 20,000.
Over 20,000. So we're going to break that 100,000 mark here. But also to let you know that the MDI is growing across Canada. In fact, many provinces now are implementing the MDI from Ontario to Nova Scotia to Manitoba, as well as Alberta and the Northwest Territories. And this year we actually have the Yukon is on board, as well as the Francophone School District, and many more districts in Ontario. I have to say it's been growing exponentially there because they really see the MDI as a way to give them information on school climate. So I'm going to, in the next just little bit, I'm going to take about 15 minutes here to, before you get into the sort of details of implementation, I really wanted to give you a sense of, you know, before you do your MDI, just start thinking already of how you're going to use your MDI data. I think it's so essential to both for yourselves who are going to be working in the trenches doing this, and when people ask you what's the purpose, why are we doing this, you know, what's this data going to be used for? And I do want to emphasize that one thing that I've experienced over the years is that often the teachers don't understand that they get this data back. It's very fascinating to me that there's school level data where they can learn about their children, about their voices. So here's 5 ways in which I thought just to sort of think forward ways you can use your middle years development instrument data to move to success in schools, really moving from the data to the action. And again, I think right now is the time to even start thinking about how are you going to use these data. So here's my top 5. I actually probably have a top 20 list, but I knew I wouldn't have that much time. I think Merritt and Anne-Marie wouldn't want me to do that. So so I'm going to just use my top 5 list for now. Okay, so here's number 1, and then I go into a little bit of detail. MDI data can provide a way to understand students' perspectives about their lives inside and outside of school. Number 2, MDI data can be used to catalyze discussions about students' connectedness to adults in schools. 3, MDI data can be connected to the BC redesigned curriculums, personal and social competencies. Some of you might not have realized that it actually was developed with that in mind. 4, MDI data can be used to understand your efforts to promote student social and emotional learning. Another thing that we have intentionally developed the MDI to assess all dimensions of SEL. And then 5, MDI data can be used to connect to community organizations in your district and catalyze action. And I just want to double click on this last one and just tell you that really, you know, when the MDI was developed by working with community and schools, educators together, it was the idea of actually perhaps instigating connections that weren't there before, building that bridge that we know is so important, and what a wonderful way to connect around child well-being. Okay, so let me go back there. I just want to point you to make sure, if you don't know already, there's an amazing treasure trove of using data to action called the Discover MDI, or www.discovermdi.ca. It helps you move from data to action with lots and lots of information, webinars, handouts as well. Oh, I'm going backwards. Sorry about that. There's just, for example, there's a whole Making Change Developing Ideas workshop. There's so much information here that you just have to like download and read that, you go through that. I'm not going to go through it, but just please spend some time on this. Even prior to doing your MDI, you'll find so much information, along with really short videos. One thing it might be when you're going to your team to do the MDI, there's some really short videos that are wonderful that could be just a few minutes to show what the MDI is about in terms of assets. Strategy 1, use the MDI as a way to understand students' perspectives. Remember, the MDI are teachers. When we first developed the MDI, and actually through my decades of research with kids, I go to them and I tell them I want to learn about them. And I first asked, like, should I ask your teachers? And they're like, no. And I asked, should I ask your parents? Like, no, maybe, but not as much. I said, should I go read some books? And they're like, no, you need to ask us. So that's really how you should present the MDI to students, that they are our teachers. We want to help make a better life, a better world for all children, and what better way to start than listening to what they have to say and learning about them. It also aligns with the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, that children have a right to give their opinion and be listened to by the adults around them. And I'm just thinking, as an aside, wouldn't it be wonderful to actually, when you go and talk about the MDI, to actually have children learn about the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. There's so many other spin-offs here to help. The MDI is a instructional tool to catalyze different kinds of children's voices. There's an article, it's one of my favorites, and one of my top 10 lists is the mindset of teachers capable of fostering resilience in students. We're going to send that. You'll get that as one of the links. But what I love is a statement here that recognizes that if educators are to effectively relate to students, they must be empathic, always attempting to perceive the world through the eyes of the student. So keep in mind that you'll learn from students, and they might say things that you don't totally agree with. You're like, well, I didn't think they would see it that way, but this is learning from them and how critical it is to perceive that, to have that empathy. Use MDI data to catalyze discussions about students' connectedness to adults in school. And this is one of the most, I have to say, both provocative and sticky questions on the MDI when children are asked, are there any important adults at your school? And if so, what are their initials? And often people are like, well, what makes an important, what makes an adult important? Well, we know from the research on resiliency that one important adult is critical. So here's this beautiful quote, Yuri Bronfenbrenner. If you've seen me speak before, you know I include it in every single one of my presentations because I love it, that every child requires someone in his or her life who's absolutely crazy about them. And we know that connection to one significant adult is what promotes resiliency. We also know from research that we've conducted here with Ava Oberle, myself, and others, that connectedness to adults in school predicted well-being on the MDI, and that even taking into account socioeconomic status, that it was even more important to well-being than that. Here's just one example of how one school district took their MDI data to move to action. In 2013-2014, Port Alberni got their district data and were shocked and dismayed that 53% of their grade 7 students said there's not one person at their school who was important to them. That moved them to action and to do lots of ways to connect and think about, strategize. If you look in 2014, they had these data, and this is another wonderful part about the MDI. You can look at trends over time and changes specifically at the school level, at the district level, at the community level. They moved to 38% saying no one, and then in 2015, 2016, 30% saying no one. So here you see how a strategy, how the data instigated action to really make a difference in changing the students' connections to adults. I just love these. These are some questions from the mindset for teaching teachers who teach resiliency. Thinking about these questions to your staff, to the community, what words would you hope your students use to describe you? What have you done in the past month so they are likely to use these words? What words would they actually use to describe you? And how close would the words you hope they use parallel the words they would actually use? So those are some great sparking conversations, inquiry in a staff meeting, many ways to get this as you use your MDI data. And this is just, I had to just show you this wonderful article I just found on Edutopia. And if any of you have not gone there, there's amazing videos, it's called the George Lucas Educational Foundation. I'm guessing some of you might have heard of that guy, George Lucas. Anyway, this is just a study that found that welcoming students with a smile at the door actually increased student academic engagement by 20 percentage points and decreased disruptive behavior by 9 percentage points, just by having a teacher at the classroom door as students are filing in, welcoming each one. It's so simple and yet so profound in its impact. Okay, using MDI data to connect to the BC curriculums, personal and social competencies. Here it just gives you a bit of the connection here. Just so you know, some of you might be aware, I was one of the advisors to the Ministry of Education for the new redesigned curriculum and had some influence in the different dimensions of the personal and social competency. You could either really applaud that or you might kind of have some questions for me. But anyways, just so you know, so of course the MDI actually assesses all these dimensions of positive personal and cultural identity, personal awareness and responsibility, and social responsibility. And wouldn't it be interesting to even take some of the questions on the MDI to do further inquiry with students, to use them to do a self-assessment and then to give evidence. So there's so many ways you can use just even the MDI questions as a catalyst for further conversations that link to the redesigned curriculum. And then number four strategy is using it to understand your efforts to promote students' social and emotional learning. So I imagine, just from being around the province, that many of you in your districts and your schools are using programs and practices that promote students' social and emotional learning. We actually, by having our redesigned curriculum, we are one of the few places in the world, British Columbia, in which there's an explicit and intentional focus on SEL. Many of your districts actually have people in your districts who support that. And just so you know that what we have on the MDI are many dimensions of social and emotional learning, from things like happiness, empathy, self-awareness, perseverance, self-regulation, all looking at that. So you can actually get a sense of students' social and emotional competencies from the MDI. And just so you know, also many of the measures that we use are ones in which you can see change over time, so they're malleable. So here's CASEL. Some of you are familiar with Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning that has identified 5 dimensions of SEL, including self-awareness and self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. And as you can see from this diagram, that the MDI has measures of each one of these 5 dimensions. So you can actually get a sense of how your students are doing on different dimensions of SEL at the school level. And so you can use it knowing, first of all, that these skills are malleable. They can be taught. So if you're finding that your students are really low on empathy, you can say, well, let's do some programs in empathy and see if we could change our results, because we know through neuroplasticity that you can teach these skills. We also know, if any of you have not heard about this groundbreaking study produced by CASEL, a meta-analysis of 213 studies, 270,000 students, and they compared those students, K-12, who were in programs that promoted SEL and those who were not in programs. And they found that those students who were in SEL programs some point during their K-12 had not only an increase of 22% in social emotional competencies and 9% in positive attitudes, they also had increased kind behaviors, decreased aggressive behaviors, and decreased emotional distress. But the real sticky one here, well, if this is what matters or this is what you need to rationalize, is that the students in SEL programs, as in contrast to those who did not, students in SEL programs had an increase of 11 percentile points in their academic achievement. Again, showing that SEL or promoting students' social emotional well-being or competence in schools does not take away from academics. It actually increases students' academics. And many of you who know with students, it simply says students feel, when students feel the best, they learn the best. And this is really the data that proves this to be true. I put in some programs here. Some of you are familiar with Roots of Empathy. You can use this MDI to look at, if you're doing Roots of Empathy, do you see changes in students, as well as programs like Mind Up, as well as a new program, just to point you to, I've just done some research on it, called Kindness in the Classroom, with free K-12 lesson plans. And actually there's a BC version. If you want more information, I certainly can provide that. But this is another program. And actually they just released free online teacher training. So you don't even need to have a trainer come in. You can do it online and be able to deliver the program, and really positive aspects. Okay, down to my last few minutes here. Strategy number 5. Use your MDI data to connect to community organizations in your district and catalyze action. Can I just tell you, now is the time to begin thinking about how you can connect to your community, how you can connect to your community organizations, to inform them you're collecting the MDI, and to start thinking about organizing meetings once you get your MDI data. And I'm going to give you one example of a district here in the Lower Mainland, Burnaby, that did just that they worked together with their community organizations to make a dent in after-school time because they were concerned about it. So here you see their data from 2012, 2013, and you see quite across the whole Burnaby School District. This is mapped. The darker areas mean a larger proportion of children engaged in after-school time, the lighter areas being a small amount. And what is important to note here is the inequity, is the diversity, that it depends on where you live, it depends on what's available to you or whether or not you participate in after-school activities. So here you see in 2012, and they saw that as a problem. How can we get more available resources working with the community to get children in after-school time? You see in 2014, 2015, there's actually less inequity, but there's still some. There's still the haves and have-nots, so to speak, of smaller, areas in which there's fewer children involved in after-school time as opposed to other areas. This also happened in 2015-20. It's darkening, it's getting richer, soil is getting richer, but there's still some inequity. And then here's what happens in 2017-2018. They leveled the playing field, so to speak. Oh, actually, I guess that's a great literary a note, playing field. But they actually eliminated the inequity of the neighborhood in which you lived in terms of whether or not you participated in after-school time. So again, Burnaby is a wonderful example of how they use that MDI to bring together community, to work together to really eliminate barriers for children who wanted to be involved in after-school time. And so that's it for me for now. I think I made my allotted time, and I'm going to turn it over to Merritt and Anne Marie.
Thank you, Kim. That was great.